So this video is based on the concept of a cash flow problem. The video will delve into what a cash flow problem actually looks like, and the issues related to one and how to fix it. To begin with, I'm going to show you a clip from the show 2.5 Men. I always show it when teaching cash flow problem as it illustrates it so well. So if you've never seen the show before, it's based on a millionaire called Charlie Harper, who's made his fortunes by creating music for TV shows.
Wonderful building. What's wrong with it? Well, the phrase reeks of urine comes to mind. Here we are. That's seldom a good sign.
Hello, Stan?
Who wants to know?
It's Charlie Harper.
Charlie! Hey, it's good to see you. Come on in. Just don't rip the tape. They check. So what's going on? What can I do you for?
Well, Stan, I got a problem.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Well, sit down. Talk to me, huh? Come on.
All of my credit cards are dead, and they tell me the bills haven't been paid in 4 months.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Excuse me, maybe this is none of my business, but how does something like that happen?
Well, in layman's terms, your brother ran out of money.
What? How did I run out of money?
Oh, I knew you'd ask that. Let me demonstrate. Think of this water as cash flow, which for you would be, royalties from your jingles, right? And this cup, your financial well-being. This little hole would be your expenses. Huh? You dig? Okay. Now, Charlie, with most people, when money comes in, it drips out and pays their bills with a healthy reserve for emergencies. See? But with you, however, this is what I love about you, Charlie. You spend it as quick as you get it. You see, you don't drip. You hemorrhage. Huh? Look at that. When the cash flow starts to slow down, there's no reserve.
So after the video, to consider cash flow problem in actual numbers, we could consider cash flow calculation on the screen. So what I'd recommend is to pause the video and quickly calculate the opening balance for the first quarter and the net cash flow for the second quarter. If you are having problems and not sure how to do it, don't worry, I'm going to go through the answers in a second. Okay, so the net cash flow in the first quarter is negative 27,300, as you can see here. So that means there's a lot more in terms of cash flowing out of the business than what's flowing into the business. The closing balance is minus 1,700, so it's nowhere near as severe as the net cash flow, which suggests the opening balance is rather positive. Now, the usual formula for closing balance is your net cash flow plus your opening balance, but because we've got missing numbers within that, we have to rearrange the formula and we have to consider an equation. So what we could do is we could do kind of like a scales and balance out the equation. So as we can see here, I'm trying to balance out, and the way to balance out to get n is I have to pretty much do the opposite. I have to do the inverse, and I have to add 27,300, so positive 27,300 to this side here, but also to this side in order to get n. So if I add 27,300 to minus 27,300, I cancel it out, okay? If I add 27,300 to minus 1,700, I get 25,600. Now, if we go back to the original formula and do minus 27,300 plus 25,600, what we'll get is minus 1,700. So that will be the opening balance for January to March. Now, with regards to April to June and the net cash flow, so I'll do this in a different colour, so I'll do it in green. We can see the cash inflows of 49,800. We can see the cash outflows of 59,400. So there's much more cash leaving the business than, again, what's coming in. So again, 49,800 minus 59,400, and we should get minus 9,600. So as we can see, in all the quarters, the closing balance is negative, and it continues to get worse. We could argue that this suggests that there's a cash flow problem within this company. Now, many new businesses might experience negative closing balances at the beginning with high initial costs, but see the net cash flow improving from month to month, so we see promise. Some businesses may see a negative cash flow in certain months due to the seasonal nature of the business, but then in the in-season, that makes up for it by such positive closing balances. Sometimes we might see a company which has an emergency situation, and therefore that puts pressure on their net cash flow for 1 month. However, in this given example, outflows are inconsistent, but they're always higher than the inflows. And in the final quarter, there is a little bit of hope with a dramatic increase in the inflows, but we haven't got enough information, we haven't got enough qualitative information to provide further context. It might be a sign, but it might not be. And if sales fall again, then this company is in real trouble. So clearly, a cash flow problem occurs when outflows are higher than inflows, and it creates a negative net cash flow. And when that negative net cash flow starts to accumulate, it accumulates into an ever-growing negative closing balance. If it reaches a point where the business runs out of cash and they find it really difficult to access cash, then they'll become insolvent, meaning they're unable to pay the debts that are owed. And what I mean about access, for example, a company might be able to access an overdraft, but if they start putting more and more pressure onto that overdraft and they actually max that overdraft out, then they're going to find that really hard to increase that overdraft or acquire finance from maybe other banks because they are seen as a credit risk. And if they're unable to make those payments on those debts that they owe, then again they will become insolvent. So what can cause this? As I mentioned before, we have to consider outflows and we have to consider inflows. But if outflows start to get out of control and they start to become excessive and hard to control and hard to manage, then that can obviously cause cash flow problems. Or if there's a severe lack of inflows or inflows start to fall, again, that will cause problems. So, let's consider the recent situation of the coronavirus. Many countries are in lockdown, which means certain companies are unable to operate. Those who depend on footfall and cannot easily operate on e-commerce may see no inflows at all from what is usually consistent and significant in their cash flow in terms of sales. Others that are able to operate via e-commerce will still see a rapid decline in their sales. You may argue that their variable costs will be much lower because they're not selling as much. However, these firms still have expenses. They have to be paid regardless of production. Businesses still have to pay rent to landlords. They still have to repay previous loans. They still have to pay insurance. And therefore, with outflows still ongoing, but the inability to bring in inflows from sales, we see that 800,000 to 1 million firms nationwide may soon have to close as they become insolvent. The government is trying to reduce the cost burden by the furlough system, which means firms can apply and it will reduce one of their significant costs with regards to labour. So in other words, the government pays the labour on behalf of the business to 80%. And they've also enabled loans which could boost inflows, but for some companies it won't be enough. Firms such as Cath Kidston and Debenhams have experienced such severe cash flow problems that their existence might be no longer on the high street. Now, this next example is a really common cash flow problem which I've seen assessed in many exam papers, and it relates to trade credits. So trade credits is additional time to make a payment. Suppliers offer it as to build loyalty and to increase competitiveness against other suppliers. Firms request it as it helps to delay cash outflows, making it easier to manage their outgoings and relieve pressure on their cash flow. However, I've seen in many case studies where you have a firm which receives a trade credit which is known as a trade receivable and therefore have to pay it but also issue it, known as a trade payable, and therefore they are owed it as well by customers. So within this picture here, we can see that they have got trade credits which are offered to major customers of 60 days. Again, this is known as a trade receivable because they have to receive it in that period of time, that cash. And they also request it from their suppliers, and they get 27 trade payable because, again, they have to pay it within those 27 days. So this example means that they have to pay their suppliers 33 days before they receive payment from their customer. This might create problems, and therefore one solution would be to negotiate these days to make them closer together. So in other words, for example, try and actually balance them out completely. So you're paying, you're asking customers to maybe pay in 30 days, but you're also asking suppliers to maybe increase their trade credits from 27 to 30 days. That obviously depends on if the supplier is willing to do it, and it depends if the customer's willing to do it. You could completely stop offering the trade credits to customers, full stop, but then you don't want that to result in losing those customers. But this is a common problem with trade credits, where actually the trade receivables are much later than the trade payables. So you've got cash flowing out of the business, and actually you've got money being sent to the supplier on two different occasions before you even receive the payment from the customer, which again is obviously going to put pressure on your net cash flow. Another factor which we have to consider with regards to outflows is gearing. Now, gearing refers to business growth, which is based on credit and borrowing. For example, if a firm has acquired a bank loan for expansion, it will boost their inflows, allowing them the capital to carry out the growth strategy. However, depending on their credit agreement, obviously they have to repay that, but they're susceptible to changes in interest rates as well. And those interest rates are completely out of their control. So the article that I've put on the screen, this was in 2019, and last year it was predicted that interest rates could increase several times. And this may mean that the commercial bank who has issued the firm a loan may also have to increase their rates. This would result in higher fixed costs, increasing outflows, and is a risk of gearing. Fortunately, interest rates actually in 2019 they only increased once, and it was only by 0.25%, and they've fallen again now because of the COVID-19. So these businesses that relied on borrowing to expand, they didn't actually have these problems, but that's not to say they could face them in the future. So clearly, if outflows are growing, it's important to also increase inflows. Many firms are trying to consider ways of boosting their inflows at this time of lockdown. Some have been incredibly innovative with their strategies. Others have accelerated their e-commerce and m-commerce services, and some are bringing in sales promotions. Now, Nike Inc. have recently offered 25% of everything on their website to accelerate sales and help bring in further revenue to help their net cash flow. I was on made.com, which is an interior design shop, the other day, and I noticed that they had 20% off everything. So sales discounts are becoming a quite, I suppose, a short-term solution to try and help stabilise that net cash flow, because obviously, as I mentioned before, with the reduction in footfall, people not visiting high streets because they're in lockdown.